Okay, welcome, Rodrigo Bautista from New York City.
Thank you for
Rodrigo
that.
is an entrepreneur, activist, human towards building a good planet. And we got together today in the full circle conversations, um, focusing on the element of deep alignment. So deep alignment as the function of cultivating wisdom, grounding oneself, rooting oneself, to be able to move on as a second step to define the future actualization, and then to move on as a third step to building the future before we go back to check, are we still in the right place? So today's conversation will be focused on Rodrigo's tools and knowledge around being able to ground yourself and being the person you want to be towards um, navigating the complexities around moving towards a good planet. Thank you for being here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your points of views. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then we just get going?
Thanks, Thomas, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of your project. And yeah, my name is Rodrigo Bautista. I am originally a designer by background. I studied industrial design and really been curious over the last decade of my career, how can we use design for transformation towards a planetary civilization, which is very, I think, one of our biggest quests right now this century, what we're experiencing, in terms of the challenges, not only externally, but also as part of this conversation in terms of how you are deeply knowing yourself, and therefore you can align with others to work together towards a new and better society and planet. My work is, I have different hats. So I work in an NGO called Forum for the Future, where we work on system change and really help public sector, private sector, and other foundations to create change towards, reducing 1.5 degree, reducing the possibilities to cross the 1.5 degree barrier set up in Paris in 2015 around climate change, sustainable nutrition, and also value chains. And I also wear another hat. I in a startup where it's called Made of Air, where we capture atmospheric carbon and create materials for construction and design. And in my free time, I love cycling and design cycling jerseys.
Nice. So you already spoke to the parts that we're going to focus on, which is since you're very interested and working on a new narrative for planetary society, also in a sustainable way, of course. It begins with the individual. What does that mean? What does the individual have to do in order to be able to contribute in a meaningful way towards that new planetary framework that you're talking about?
Yeah, I love this question. I think I completely agree with you. That is the first question that we have to tackle in terms of all the different work that is trying to shape a new horizon for humanity in living in this planet. And I think when you are saying this, immediately send me back when I worked for an advertising agency a long time ago. And when I was working there as an industrial designer and working, from packaging to communication between and the person and the brands, and with all sorts of different type of channels, from online to shops, etc. I hated it. Essentially, it was like, I remember arriving to the first kind of gathering, the social gathering with my colleagues, which they were great. They were also super creative and really talented, creative designers, strategies. However, for me, the first question that I think I was just really pondering and really not finding a good answer within those things that we were doing was why? Why are we doing this?
Mhm.
Why are we using our talent, our time to do this? And I think and from me and from that perspective, it starts there. It starts like asking not just once but constantly why you're doing what you're doing, and trying to find some sort of answer that helps you to navigate the complexities of whatever you're going to do, because some things can be very challenging, just technically challenging. Some things will be challenging in terms of persuading others to come along with you in the projects that you want to do, but also some others will be, even within a group that you're moving together, you will face so many barriers and challenges. So I think the why was for me back then very strong question, which essentially ended up for me to saying I only last 6 months in that job because I said, sorry guys, I really can't do this. And then, but actually, I think also I was late. I see many other people that kind of, they're 18 and they were really conscious of multiple questions, or even younger, and especially now I think our younger generations are seeing the opportunity of creating, or of really kind of correcting the trajectory that we're going through in terms of climate change. I'm thinking in terms of population nationalism, discrimination, really racial problems that our societies are have been louder and louder over the last few years. So I think there is a why that starts from before that, and that's also probably also going even back to how you were how your parents were treating you, what kind of things you were asked, what kind of music you heard, no? And I think it's like even that. I think for me that element of thinking the why and understanding that we're interdependent, and thinking beyond material
I'd like,
objects, I think is
I'd,
key.
I'd like to pick up on the why a little bit. So asking that question, as you say, is step one. Now, let's say you come to a conclusion about the why, and then that inevitably means that there will be some consequences to take. Like in your case, you were describing, you quit that job after 6 months. In a more societal planetary perspective, it would mean logging out of ways we do business, or ways we do society, etc. That requires a lot of courage, because the mainstream and your social environment doesn't really support that usually. Um, so that leads to two questions. The one question is, how do you optimize for an environment that supports these paradigm shifts that you inevitably have to go through if you ask the why deep enough? That's one question. The other question is, how do you build the courage in the first place to move out of the paradigm into something else?
So the first one, how do you build courage, and the second one, or is more about how do you enable these, or
How do you create the environment
create them, or
around you, the social environment that supports this type of exploration and paradigm shift?
yeah. I think the short answer to those, I think they're completely interlinked, and almost like it's very difficult to build courage if you are not socially supported. No, I think you do need you do need a lot of self-awareness, a lot of kind of belief in yourself, and really kind of um, confidence, no, and which sometimes is built through being in a well-supported society and family and friends, etc., that help you. But also, I think some others are just like through the right combination between being brave enough to understand that you don't know what is going to happen once you quit a job or ask the why and say this is not right, and be okay with uncertainty, because there is no clear answer on what's going to be the repercussion, the result.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was also like being ignorant enough, I think, of saying, yeah, it's like this naive optimism to say, I can do this. And I think that's very important, just to just sometimes jump, even when we jump to our hunches. So in a way, I had a huge hunch. So I was, back then I was working in Mexico City. I'm originally from Mexico, and seriously, when I was telling the story of that I was quitting another job that wasn't that was the advertising one, but then I was working for the richest man in the world back then in telecommunications, which is something, as an industry that I truly enjoy. Telecommunications, I think they offer what we're living right now. You know, the fact that we can be interviewed and you are in Europe, I'm in New York, etc. So that's something I truly think is fundamental for how we are evolving as humans.
Mm-hmm.
But I still was like, kind of, we need to kind of keep. I need to keep learning and pushing. And when I was quitting that job, many people, friends and family, were like, "Are you crazy?" It's like many people in Mexico want to go there, work there, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was like, no, you know what? I I think I have to see the world. I mean, I never left the country back then, and I was around 25 years old. So for me, it was like really important to go out and see the world, and I started to understand it in a different way. And I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't know if it was going to end up well. And it was really, and I didn't know all the things that were going to be really hard as a result of that decision. You know? Which is what I call just being kind of, yeah, sometimes a little bit of optimism, while your hunches tell you have to do something different, even though it might be harder, and probably will be harder. But I think that's
that
life.
again, I think that leads back to the courage question, because maintaining a position of an naive outlook on the world, or a curious outlook on the world, however you want to frame it, requires you to be courageous, especially if and when you learn more about the world. Because the more you learn about the world, the harder it becomes for you to stay naive and to stay curious and open. Which in turn means that the more you progress on this path, the more you have to cultivate courage in an active way. And that really interests me, because it sounds like you managed to do that in a way. How did you create cultivate that courage inside of you?
I think that this kind of an ongoing activity. I think that's never kind of fully settled, and I definitely, looking back, I love that I then took the decisions I took in terms of like leaving the country, starting again, going to a master's, studying a master's in the UK, and then and ending up even working, in kind of restaurants when I was working in, in an office before, etc. So it was like kind of something courageous and at some point stupid, but at the same time, it was like, oh yeah, I love that I did it, because it helped me and gave me like a completely different chance that I wouldn't have had. I think today the chances to continue are there, but there's something very important for me right now, as I was thinking when I was coming to this conversation, is just to be open to be continuously learning and on learning. So I think that is something that has been a reminder now for me over the next 12 months, or a little bit more, in terms of going back to these spaces where I'm sitting with other people that want to learn, that keep learning, that they have um, an acknowledgement that there are many other things that we don't know, no. And I think courage has to come with the authenticity and understanding and awareness that it's okay not to know, but it's not okay not to do anything about it. No, carrying on. I think that that's important, but also I think it's a lot of then the other side. I'm probably been talking more about the kind of pragmatic, professional side and academic, etc. But the other side is the emotional side. I think for courage, and the emotional side is also about how are you working on yourself? How are you really kind of understanding what are your fears? What are you fear of? How are you confronting your fears? What kind of things help you to cope when things get hard? How things how do you understand your background, why you are the way you are, what things from the way you are when you can see a little bit more of yourself and understand those fears.
Do you have any tools or procedures or rituals that help
From
you do that?
ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
And
Okay.
I must say, I have to admit 100%, I would love to do that. I haven't done it. No, I think I think there is a lot of therapy. No, I think therapy helps. I think traveling, having this time to really stop contemplation. Essentially, I think we are in this kind of era of always everything and everyone is competing for our attention, from the phone that's next to us to the our relationships. No, ourselves also are kind of we tend to think that our thoughts are who we are, and what we think is what is almost so powerful that make us think that our thoughts and thinking process is who we are, and we sometimes have to detach ourselves of even the thoughts that we have, and not fully, or more like recognizing that we, by stopping and seriously stopping, and with this I mean, like, sit down, and I'm not saying go and meditate, but seriously just stop. Healthy 5 minutes one day, every day, for instance.
Okay.
And just concentrate on your breathing, and just really try to kind of forget about the 20 million things that you probably should be very occupied, etc., and all that. And I think those moments of having a chance, for me, that has been really helpful, like really contemplate a little bit more, because by doing that and being more present and being more calm, is helping me a lot more to myself, in terms of not rushing so much, not being automatic. And I think that's a really important part of being courageous, when you actually don't have an automatic response to your fears or to what you think is courage, but actually you're making a pause and stopping, because then you understand a little bit more of yourself, and what is actually something that could be potentially a trouble, or potentially something that is not you're not paying enough attention, and be intentional about it. So courageous doesn't mean that you have to go and jump right out of the bridge. Sometimes it's just a very simple, courageous conversation with someone that you haven't had it for a while.
You keep referring to other people, like I mean, you just now mentioned that taking time for yourself and having that contemplation, that conversation with yourself about the 20 million things that you need to do. Those 20 million things still are there, or do they reduce somehow through that contemplation process?
I think they still will be there, but probably, yeah. I think there's something really valuable about relating to the things that keep you busy, that you can actually see which ones are more definitely priority and more meaningful to not only the now, but also the life you are building. Because I think is that
And
initially,
what is the
grounding yourself.
do you have like something like a framework? You said are more meaningful. Um, so out of those 20 million things that want to be done, um, how do you pick and choose the ones that are really important to do?
Yeah, I'm about to become a father, and I think that is not my kid is going to be my framework, but it's changing a lot of things. How I used to think about that. You know? How I used to think about it's very simple. You create a matrix, and long term versus whatever return of or significant change and impact, whatever. Mm, I I think, well, I believe those kind of things are useful and help you to kind of, surface things out that you probably are thinking but not necessarily seeing in front of you. I also think that probably doing those exercises are one step for then the next one, which is when you can just essentially start to say, well, I see in 10 years or 5 years or 15 years how I would like things to change. And this is professionally and personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a little bit of how I personally work, and many people do not work like that. I'm a kind of, I like to be thinking about the long-term scenario. I like to be thinking about the vision. I like to be thinking about that long arc. And then for me, it feels more natural to kind of see, oh, is this kind of helping towards that? But I know also some people are not like that, and that's also great. And you need the someone that's probably more analytical and is just thinking about how we're going to make that happen right now. Now, what is the kind of nuts and bolts? And I find myself that now I wouldn't say kind of the framework is just the matrix that you could create, which is I think again very useful, but it's more about also understanding what do you bring, where do you naturally go, and where are you lacking kind of information, and then you need to kind of play it all out. And then in that case, for example, with my partner, I could then just go and she thinks very different about things, and being very complimentary about that is something that helps to say, oh, okay, yeah, probably then these 2-3 things are more definitely more priority for us right now. Um, I think, yeah, don't necessarily that answer your question. I wish I could have say the framework of
That's
something.
I'd like to build on that actually because so you say long-term goal and a vision helps you be clear about what needs to be done today and what is missing through that, right? So because you know what needs to be done and what your capabilities are and your resources, you know what's missing. Um, that's where the second part of the question that I posed earlier comes in, and you hinted at that a couple of times. It's also about people around you. Now, um, aligning people along and towards a long-term mission or vision is um, hard and necessary. What is your experience around that? How do you go about that? Because ultimately, you're talking about the new circulatory framework, right? So that's the big version of that. And so I'm really curious to hear how do you align people around the vision like that?
Yeah. Well, I think 2 things. And pausing for a minute, the kind of deep alignment point, and not more thinking about the vision, because I think this is almost like another part of the full circle conversation, right? But I think that um, that to me is something I've been doing for a while now at work, and particularly with Forum for the Future, is something like how do you really bring different entities, and this could be inside an organization or multiple organizations, to create a vision for everyone to participate and feel like they are not only being heard, they're kind of being ambitious enough. And then on our side, coming not only as facilitating the process, convening the space and creating a space to really um, provide trust. Also, for us, is our role is to challenge from a sustainability perspective. So thinking about environmental, social, and the economic side of things. And I think what I've seen and what I enjoy the most is sometimes many people think like, oh, when you go through a process, which is, we call it a futures vision process, which is essentially you can use different trends, combine them and create scenarios, or the scenarios are kind of stories of the future. And you can create 1, 2, or 3, or as many as you like. And that could pan out on how that organization or group of organizations will be facing a very different future. And while people sometimes at the very beginning of these type of projects tend to focus so much into what is going to be the output, what is going to be the particular kind of, thing we're going to produce and we're going to see. What I see is very much more important on that is the process that people go through. Because I think I experienced many times people that were just like, well, I'm just here because my boss asked me to be here. So I'm not really interested. Versus like a transition of after they go through the process to say, well, I'm now focusing on how my MBA is going to be very focused on sustainability. And that transition, that kind of paradigm shift, it doesn't happen because you have an output. It just, I think, is something that that by the conversations you have, the people that you're inviting, the clashing of different ideas and paradigms that are happening during the process that sometimes you can't control, or many times you can't control, and help people to challenge themselves, create a vision that is a collective vision, hear a lot more. And I think that's very important. So essentially, how do you create a process that you help people in a safe space and trusted space to challenge themselves, to listen to each other, and then the key thing is, are we kind of asking the questions of all the things that I can see in the future, that you can see in the future, that the next person can see in the future, are being represented in these possible stories or these possible visions that we're seeing. Forgive them for the bad. And that's, I think, the part I enjoy the most. Forgive them for bad. That means like, what are going to be the barriers that we're going to be facing? How actually is going to be much more different. Like if, for instance, in 10, 15 years, we have a climate crisis as many people are projecting, how we're going to be facing that. If we have a more regenerative paradigm flows in around governance and how people interact with the planet and ourselves and the economy, how that's going to pan out. And then what kind of role you want to have there, but yeah, I mean, I went long in that one, but essentially I think I love those processes. I think are fundamental, but as I said, trust, empathy, and really kind of helping to hear the things that you are not so familiar with from others.
But then also boils down to be able to be authentic, be able to be connected to yourself, and in order to be open enough and courageous enough to do that. In those group conversations, especially when the motivation of the participants is not entirely clear, sometimes that can be hard. Now I can see and imagine that with 5 people or with 20 people, but bringing that into something where 7.5 billion people are at one point strong enough within themselves to move towards a new paradigm is a bit challenging, or is an interesting challenge. Is an interesting challenge.
It is a huge challenge, and I love that you're talking about that. And that's some of that's when is, how the kind of questions that we ask shape us. And I love that question because essentially is this, for me, it relates and it goes back to the concept of planetary civilization. And when I think about planetary civilization, just a brief explanation is essentially astrophysicists since the 1960s, they created this framework or hypothesis that if we could have a different relationship with the things that we can see in the universe and manage it and control it, etc., we could create in types of civilization. So for a minute, just as an example, think back like thousands of years ago when we didn't know how to use fire. Once humans understood how to use fire, we start to kind of evolve a little bit and have different behavior. So what now exponentially think about that, like what they say is like, what would happen once we understand black holes and know how to relate to black holes, know how to relate to and use speed of light, understand time being a very different concept. So based on that, they created this framework, which is type 1 civilization is planetary civilization, a civilization that is capable to have a dynamic balance with its planet. Civilization type 2 is stellar. A civilization that's capable to travel in between planets as we travel in between different countries, traveling speed of light, harvesting this energy of the sun to the max. And then civilization type 3, galactic. Galactic civilization is a civilization that essentially uses black holes. Think Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, essentially. So you can use black holes and travel in time according to what these guys are imagining, the possibilities given what we understand. So based on all that, the question is, where are we? What kind of civilization are we? And we're type 0. So essentially, we haven't got there. We're not even type 1. So we're in the most important time of human history. And many people say that this century, the 21st century, is where we probably could get it right or wrong. Right now, the trends are not very good for all of us, and one of them is, while we have the technological capacity, we have some political, capacity too. I mean, going back to the Paris Agreement, what I was saying, and we have many intellectual and academic papers that are there. What we don't have is what you're asking. Mm-hmm. The mental model, the paradigm shift, the really understanding that, okay, we have to do something differently, and to that scale, 7.5 billion. Mm-hmm. So a thing that I love, and I think that from a creative perspective, I call people and invite them to connect with me, because I think there's something to do there with the overview effect. Have you heard about the overview effect? Overview effect. No. So the overview effect is probably, this is this kind of a number that might be old, but around a year ago, it was like 550 people are the only ones that have experienced it. And it's what astronauts experience when they go out of the Earth and they start to Earth gazing. So they're observing the planet. And I think when they're in the International Space Station, they're kind of free of duties and they can chill. What they do is just go down, sit on the window, and observe the Earth. Apparently, I think the ISS goes around the planet 15 times in one day. And what it happens is they start to see it like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of our tiny little boat in this gigantic ocean that is the universe. How we are going to relate to this? And they start to see how the clouds move, the deserts, how the planet switches on, the lights pop up. There's a fantastic documentary called The Overview Effect in Vimeo that I recommend. 15 minutes I recommend to watch. And every astronaut that comes back, their paradigm shifts. They are like kind of completely understanding that we're in this together. There is no way we will thrive if we are not actually really pointing towards a huge fundamental shift of how we relate to this space that we're cohabiting. And I've been wondering, how do you have an overview effect experience for the 7.5 billion that you are asking? What can we do? Imagine doing a Pokemon Go viral video game exercise that uses that concept, where people start to play it, because also it has to be fun. I don't want to be preaching people. I think everyone's tired. of people that preaches and say you have to think differently. I don't think that's the way.
Okay, so obviously, in a VR experience comes to mind. Mm, are you aware of any experiments regarding that, of inducing the overview effect through VR?
Yeah, there are some of them, and I think we need many more of them. No, as many as possible. And some of them have been like kind of the VR idea that you kind of have. You're observing this. We with Engaged by Design, which is a studio that I founded in the UK a few years back. We had a quick experiment, which was like kind of using virtual reality to observe the planet like that. But then what we wanted to do is to connect to a live satellite. So there are so many satellites right now out, and that they have cameras that are projecting or sending a live broadcast. So imagine if you can have a virtual reality experience that is also with a live broadcasting of essentially you're seeing yourself, because this is what I love. So imagine it's like suddenly I'm seeing myself from so far that I can't see myself, but essentially I'm seeing everybody else too. No, and the idea is you grab this virtual reality, you put the headset on your face, and you are seeing live the planet from whatever is the satellite at that point. And obviously, this is just a portion of what could be this experience. And from an experience design perspective, you need to use the senses, and you will only be using one or two if you put some audio, etc., whatever. But I think, as they say, every little helps, and then that's the initial step. That's probably the first baby step. But what else you can do to create a more out in space type of experience, and then how do you do it in a way that that people relate to it and want to experience it? But then also, I think that's again just probably one crazy idea on what else are the things that help us to change paradigms, and that question I think is very 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 important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the idea of the overview effect. Obviously, there are some technological hurdles to overcome first, but also some psychological. Because I mean, while it's one thing to maybe see yourself, so I can imagine there's a live picture of Earth, and overlaid over that is your current location, and your displayed as this little sparkle on this live image. That gives you an individual feeling of this is me here in this city, country, whatever, right now on this planet. And it could give you an individual experience somehow. That obviously still needs to be measured, whether that has an actual overview effect or not.
Yeah.
Or whether it is necessary to bring a couple of 100,000 or million people up into the stratosphere to give them a real life view of this, and whether that's enough to change the course of humanity. You could liken that to the ideas described in the book Nordic Secret, where it is outlined what happened in the Nordic countries about 100 years ago, where they decided to provide all young people with the opportunity to attend a meditation retreat, or something like a meditation retreat, for free until they found themselves grounded enough to go out and start life. And in that book, the authors, Thomas Björkman and his partner, I'm forgetting the name of her now, attribute the positive things that are happening in and around the Nordics at the moment to that event. That could be a possibility, because you don't need to bring 7.5 billion people into the stratosphere, you can do that with a couple of 100,000, and then it becomes more feasible. But I'm curious to what other ideas do you have towards that same end?
Over a year ago, I had my first silent retreat.
Mm-hmm.
So that experience sounded like a lot of what I went through in a way. I mean, I didn't leave the retreat feeling grounded for now go and change the world in terms of. I think I needed way more time. I think this is really interesting. I only went for 3 days now, but I left with a great kind of level of energy to feeling like different, and feeling like not different in like, oh, I'm a better person, but different in like kind of revitalized with charging energy, and also feeling like more in touch with the silence, with the stillness, with the things that are part of human life, and we don't foster as much as probably we did before. So I think that's a great experience. So all that saying that, yeah, I think it's something like that, something where you have the chance to meditate, to really go to switch off all the different things that are kind of going around. Is, I know not many people can do it for multiple reasons. I think that's something that that's very valuable. That's something that's not going out of space and burning a lot of CO2 in the process. So, and I think there's something that also reminds us that we're interconnected and we're interdependent. Yeah, because even I don't know, is probably was part of the reflections that I was hearing during those three days of silence, and one of them is just like, going back and referring back to the Big Bang, and when our current understanding of how life has evolved in the universe, and then when you start to think about that, and imagine from us, and then whoever's listening to this, as that at some point our molecules were something completely different, and right now we're who we are and where we are. So this kind of journey of that we all come from the same place, just kind of saying it and saying that we're in space right now and we're floating, it sounds crazy, but it's just something fundamental about acknowledging that. That sounds very, very trippy.
How would you describe that? How would you describe that? So that sounds like there is some connectedness that you're referring to.
Yes, it's like we are all stardust. That's what I will describe. We're all stardust.
So, from a pure physics perspective, yes, we're built of atoms that somehow came out of the Big Bang, if the Big Bang happened. But how does that connect us in a way that we actually can create meaning out of that for us? Meaning that helps us to come up with the courage and the images we need towards a new paradigm to organize ourselves as a planet.
Great question. I think to me is a little bit of, it's a reminder for me that we're closer than what we think we are. Because I think I tend to think, and probably many other people too, that I'm not being understood, or people don't see things as I'm seeing them, or people, or essentially we have like huge differences and huge holes and gaps, and and I end up in creating unnecessary separation, while actually we're a lot closer and we're not tapping into the things that bring uh, that common ground. I think that to me is initially what reminds me of get closer rather than farther apart.
Okay, so you use it as a symbol to remind us that we're essentially all equal, that we all come from the same place, that
Yeah.
there isn't any biological or physiological basis for assuming that any human is lesser or superior to another human. And that gives us common ground as humanity. Is that roughly
Right?
okay?
That's exactly yeah. Well put.
And have you experienced how that shapes or changes people's outlook? So is there an exercise that you know of that you can use this with, or have you had conversations with people where this element um, changed somebody's outlook in a similar way, like the overview effect, in a way that they, after that, started behaving differently?
I wonder if that's also probably one of the key challenges or problems with the question about mindsets and changing that outlook, etc. Because I think maybe, and this is all because of me, because sometimes I imagine like, yeah, you know what? Someone comes into a room, you tell him, her, a couple things, they go through this experience, they go out, they're another person. I know, honestly, I never seen that. I never quite see that, even with very deep experiences, and maybe I haven't hung out in the right places. But essentially, I think it's a process. I think it's like when, yeah, when I actually, before I start to think about planetary civilization or sustainability or a regenerative paradigm, I yeah, I travel in Central and South America. I left Mexico and went all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, and that was a process of nearly a year where I was reading, meeting people, and getting to know another parts of this planet. And I think that changed my paradigm, but it was also a process, no? So I think we over look or try to really find those kind of what is there's a question that people always talk in when you're designing a workshop and when you're designing an experience is like, yeah, what is this kind of mindset shift moment? Or and I think that's, you can only do but plant seeds, and I think you hope that the collective journey of those people help in that. I think there are some things that I believe more from a design experience, such as the overview effect or something like the meditation thing we were talking about, that are potentially more powerful for me from my the way how I observe things. But I also still think that nothing is like just switching on or off a light. No.
Okay. On the other hand, there must be something that is capable of doing that. Otherwise, the overview effect wouldn't work. Now, that's a massive undertaking on an individual level to fly out into space and have a look. But it remains an interesting question. Is there something that fundamentally is as strong as looking at the planet from the outside that has the capacity to shift a person's perspective. Because for all of us, at some point in our lives, there was a moment where we learned how to put letters into words and words into sentences. And that was a paradigm shift. All of a sudden, you could identify all of the stuff that's written around you when you walk down the street. That was an entire new universe that wasn't there before, and you could not unlearn that. And it's a very, very tiny tool from a technology perspective. As a psychotechnology, it's very small, but it has a massive, massive effect on the way we think and look at the world. And the question is there something out there that we've been overlooking and that can help us to create this type of systematic paradigm shift that we can teach people towards something like reading, but instead of, as a result, reading, they get an overview effect, they get insight, something that we can actively teach and trigger in people. Regardless of the content, we're not telling anybody what to read, so we're not telling anybody what to have an insight about, but just being able to have insights on your own, just like you can read something on your own. That would be a powerful psychotechnology. And that's what this conversation, I think, is revolving around. Go ahead.
I agree. I agree, and I think going fundamentally to kind of the starting of this section of the conversation, it was like kind of what can we do to shift 7.5 billion people, right? I think that's the quest, and when I think about my work life in the future, and part of what we need to be doing is we need to be trying different things. We need to be experimenting with things such as the overview effect. We need to be trying with different things about like kind of what are the readings that help people to really understand the world differently, create empathy, understand that actually biodynamics and ecological thinking and the cycles of how, for instance, nature doesn't have waste, how that you can use it to really create a different relationship with the planet, the things you use, etc. So it is plenty, I bet, because there are many different people that went through a paradigm shift, that are going through, and I wonder if there is that documentation, like if you could have your toolkit. If you're in this stage, what would you use? If you're in that stage, and you're asking questions around, more psychological things around change, what do you do? And I think there is the question to me goes back to what do we need to do to respond to the urgent climate crisis that we're starting to experience, plus everything else, right? Like, I think we obviously are running out of time, and maybe also do need probably the 7.5 billion to understand the complexity of all this, but it's actually how do you detect where are the key intervention points, almost like acupuncture, that maybe you target a lot less people, because as everything in life, you just need these replicators of information that help us to spread out knowledge and everything else.
So you're saying we only need a portion of people to have this paradigm shift, and that will trigger the rest. And I can totally follow that. There are some theories around that as well that support this. And the numbers are different. They vary between 100,000 people are enough to 3.5% to 5% of the population needs to have a paradigm shift. But still, if let's say there's a 100,000 or 1 million people that experience insight, paradigm shift into a new way of thinking about the world, seeing the world, a new literacy, overview literacy. Do they necessarily converge towards a similar point? Or does that end up in 1 million new visions of the future that then need to be aligned in order to activate the rest of the billions of people? That is an interesting point that ties back into your point early, where you said you need to have a vision in order to seed out what's important right now to do. What's your take on that?
I think I can see having that could happen. Essentially, having multiple visions of the future, because ran many of those exercises, and not everyone see it the same. But I think that's the important of creating narratives and bringing things together in a way that actually are telling. Are connecting all the different dots of what people are seeing. I also think that the risk of that to happening is well worth it, rather than keep thinking that we're on the right track. I think because right now what I'm seeing is, like, I was having a conversation with someone here in the US that are really like, well, I think things will get better once a Democrat gets elected. I'm like, don't think so. and the reason why I don't think so is because not even if a less conservative person gets elected in the UK and Brexit would haven't happened, also things will be better, quote unquote. So I think we're at the very end of the arc of the industrialization era and capitalism. So I think when you think about big eras, big human eras, let's take a zoom back, and you think about Renaissance, you think about like how we've been evolving, you think then about in industrialization of humans, and even before when we were nomads, etc. So all these huge transitions of human history, I think we're starting a new one, we're finishing one big one, and this new one, capitalism as it was an economic model, is obviously not working. The way how we're extracting value out of nature and exchanging it evidently is not working. It's creating a worse scenario. So there are many people that are obviously aware of this and are trying to create, what is this new paradigm? What is this new post-capitalism, post-socialism, post extraction of value, and creating an economy which was to be local, then was national, then was regional, and then it became global. And I think we are in that fundamental new beginning that many ideas are fighting for. And I think one of them is this one about the planetary vision. And that to me is much more, is way bigger than someone trying to fix a slightly non slightly having a position in government that still is carrying those paradigms. And I know this is not going to be smooth, as any changes are not smooth, but we're in the most important shift I see humans have ever been, and how we're going to work in that.
So I agree. We are very likely in one of the most decisive times in human history. And this is why these types of conversations are so important, because I agree there needs to be a converging narrative that we can use to align ourselves towards ourselves, meaning that portion of humanity that is required to lead this shift. So the hundred thousands, millions that are necessary to actually lead this shift. Now I see there are many people having this type of conversation and many people developing these types of visions. And somehow, but this is just a feeling, so I don't know, they seem to look very similar. The way people create the synthesis between socialist systems, capitalist systems, removing the negative effects of our monetary currency system, reorganizing supply and structuring society and all of that, looks very similar. It's very different in its concrete implementations of, let's say, governance models, but looks very similar. So my assumption from that is, and it's not more than an assumption, that once we start having these insights that that we're trying to trigger with this conversation and the deep alignment question, once we start having that as a human, it feels and looks to me like there is a very similar point that people get insights towards to. And I believe that's very interesting because it's not necessarily so. But it's, and I have a hard time describing what that is, and I have no idea of understanding why that is. And I think these are two important questions. If we can answer or begin to answer those, then we might come up with a powerful psychotechnology that we can deploy and apply.
Yeah, I think and it's very interesting how you describe it, like this kind of almost the combination of psychology and technology, and I think there is a ton to try in that in that kind of query or adventure to do that. And then I think, you know what, going to the courage back just a little bit, I also was thinking, like, why are you changing today, Rodrigo, in terms of like all these ideas? How are you behaving differently? And I think that's probably one important question for keeping yourself real and authentic and practicing the courage element, because we end up, for multiple reasons, automatically behaving in the way either that society is expecting us to behave, either the way that we learned, and we're not challenging ourselves to do things differently. And if you think about it, like, kind of, when I moved to New York 5 years ago, and now here in the US, I definitely see a lot more like people just saying, okay, yeah, the climate is changing, right? Obviously the evidence is so clear, but you almost wish, it's like, why you needed to see it to believe in it? What is kind of, and also I have a problem with the belief question. It's like, it's not about believing. You don't believe in science. You just kind of analyze the data and keep testing the models to make sure they're right. And if they're not, that's good, because that's what data science is for. You keep asking the questions and finding new models. So I think, these fantastic brains that we have and beautiful imagination, how do you reconcile that challenge between, like, sometimes it's not necessary to experience and go through something really horrible to understand how we need to change, but maybe we're all done, but we do need to.
Sorry, or maybe?
No, I'm just making a very bad joke that maybe we do need to kind of go and experience something really cathartic and tragic and meaningful to understand how it is imperative to change. It is hard to change when things are looking more or less not too bad for us personally, individually, So it's like, and this I'm talking about, obviously living in a Western country and having a very different context of life, because obviously if you're then now going to another part of the world, Mexico, to give you an easy example that I roughly know these days, and it's just 50% of the population are poor, are they going to be talking about this? Are they going to be talking about planetary civilization or changing their paradigm, etc.? No, they're very much worried about many other things, but this, no.
So here's one thing I've observed, and it's it's based on my own experience, but I've also seen it in other people, and it has to do with the radius or depth of time towards your self-empathy towards your future self. So if your self-empathy radius towards your future self is 5 minutes, you will behave differently compared to if that is 50 years. And that is measurable and has a measurable effect. So if you just today imagine yourself going shopping as an old person, just a trivial, mundane activity will change your actions, your decisions, your behavior today. Now, the ultimate version of that, of course, is imagining the end of your life, or even further than that, the life of your children beyond yourself or your grandchildren. So, as I've tested this in a couple of scenarios, we've created a format around this where people are forced to think about this. And this actually changes their outlook dramatically in a very short amount of time. And what you're experiencing or going to experience very soon, having a child, is another very powerful driver towards this. Because even if you are in a situation where the radius about your self-empathy of your future self is more in terms of hours, because you need some food. Otherwise, there's no point in thinking about 50 years. Once you have children, that automatically increases because you want those children to have a good future. So when I think about it, maybe one powerful thing in the given scenario, and maybe that even can drive automatically, is for people to have children. And given the dangerous situation we're in, whenever you have children, you want them to thrive, and you will necessarily have to do something about the dangerous situation. So maybe just that in and of itself could move us towards something new.
I love it conceptually, the idea. I was thinking about like, what happened with baby boomers? They did have a lot of kids.
Yeah, but they didn't have they didn't have the dangerous situation.
Yeah,
they didn't
exactly,
have
no.
that economic growth.
They did, because you could say no, they were living through the nuclear Cold War, etc. menace, which still potentially is something that
but they kind of
through.
like solved that part, right? You could say.
Yes, no. I think there is, and also there is the other counter argument with people that I think haven't read much about the issues around a growing population, is that there is a growing population, and people that do not understand deeply those challenges think that, oh, you just stop having kids and that's it. We're towards it, right? Which is very simplistic understanding of the issues. And I think as a paradigm thing, I think you're right. It definitely changes, as I was saying at the beginning, like kind of you start to, I'm starting to think and worry and think about things that I wasn't thinking before in the process of about to become a father. And I think also the other element that you were saying just slightly before about like seeing yourself in the future and building empathy for that self also reminded me of a workshop where we used, the classic aging app, and you take photos of people and then kind of you through that their own image they experience and could create a future. and the app was like kind of 50 years into the future, and we brought kids, elderly people, like people, you know, like adults, etc. And so it was fascinating because you have the teenagers that were like, oh, I'm going to be 67 in 50 years time, and then the elderly were like, oh well, probably I'm not going to be around. But the amount of the quality of the conversation, and I think, as you were saying, what is really interesting when you start to actually consider something I don't think we do very often, and I wish I have done back then, is what you're saying, like having empathy for yourself. And where are you then? How are you actually evolving and changing? And I think generally in life, just having more empathy for self is just such a good thing. And it is something that we haven't probably, as part of also probably being more courageous and understanding that when you're being true to what you believe on and you are being really intentional of that, if things do not work for whatever is the reason, don't over criticize yourself or really treat yourself in a way that actually doesn't help you to carry on, because because we're here with a lot of unknown things, and I think we need to be kind to the self first and to carry on. And when things that we try might not play as we expected, but we have to carry on.
Beautiful. Oh man, thank you so much for those beautiful words. I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up and circle the conversation back to where we started. I would love to deepen that in the future actualization or steering adaptation parts as well, because we touched upon those points, but we didn't allow ourselves to deepen them. And I would be really curious to hear much more about that future societal framework that you're thinking about. So thank you so much for your time, and also thank you for all the work and effort you put into moving us as humanity forward.